Hello, this is Brian Hegney, Instructor of Communication at High Point University. This is an introductory short little playlist for creating a 3D model, a 3D game character model in 3D Studio Max. We're going to base this off of Robert, the wonderful little creature character from the Inner World game series. What I did was in Photoshop, I actually created a front view and a side view for Robert all myself in Photoshop. This will not cover that, so if you don't know how to do that, well, maybe go ahead and look for videos on how to create that in Photoshop. What I'm going to do here is show you how I set up, right? So this is our world here in 3D Studio Max. I have nothing in it right now. I actually do, but I've hidden them all. We're going to start from scratch. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my command panel and go to the Create tab. It's the first tab on the left. By the way, you can resize this command panel any way you want. Let's keep it right about here on the right. So Create, I'm going to make sure I create whatever. Is this geometry? Come on. Do my little hover. Shapes, geometry. Yes, it is. Geometry. Standard primitives is all we'll get to. And I'm going to create a plane. Now, before I start, I want to make sure my parameters are correct. I want length segments to be 1 and width segments to be 2. Or 1. Ugh. Sorry. I don't need that many segments. I just need it one by one, because all I'm going to do is post a picture on it. Okay? And of course it's in centimeters. Well, how many centimeters do I want Robert to be? And you know what? I want him to be about 4 feet tall, so I forgot how. Let me just come here and look at 122 centimeters tall. Yeah, that's what I want. Sorry about that. So I'm going to, oh, did I create a plane? I did. So I'm going to go to Create Plane. One segment by one segment, and left click and drag in my front viewport. Now it's important to drag it in my front viewport because this is going to be the front of my Robert character, okay? If I drag it out in my perspective view, it drags a plane on the ground. I don't want that. Delete. If I drag it on my left viewport, it's going to drag it from my left view. Now that could work, yes, but right now I actually wanted to create the image from my front view, so hit delete. Okay, so right click into your front viewport. If you don't have a front viewport, click where it says whatever the second bracket key and look for the word front and click it, or you can tap F. And then if you want to go to another viewport, you can right click into all of these viewports to activate them. Don't left click into a 3D Max viewport. That's a great way to screw up your scene and select something you accidentally didn't want to select, or use a tool that you accidentally didn't want to use. So right now this plane tool is enabled, so if I were to left click in here, I'd just create like a tiny little plane by accident. But I'm going to create one on purpose. I'm going to left click and drag it. And it doesn't actually matter how big it is right now, because I can change that anytime I want. So this is what I do. I always just create a plane in my front view, and then from the Create tab, go right up into the Modify tab. It's the second tab in your command panel to the right. Click it. Now from the Modify tab, now we're able to actually left click and drag these little spinner arrows for the length. And if I want this to be 122 centimeters, I'm going to double click in there and type 122. I don't know how tall I want it to, or how wide I want it to be yet. I'm going to wait to see what my image looks like. The other thing I want to do, let me go ahead and enlarge this, maximize this viewport right here. With this viewport selected, I'm going to come down, drag my cursor to the very bottom right, and notice there's this little button, the button to the most bottom, most rightest, the little square with the arrow. It's called Maximize Viewport Toggle. That means it'll toggle if you left click it, maximize it, toggle it again, it'll bring it back to your quad screen here. So I'm going to maximize this, or I could hit Alt-W. That should be fine. Number one, I want this gizmo. This is my pivot point for my object. I don't want this pivot point in the middle of my plane. I want this to be at the very bottom of the plane, so when I put this in the at 0, it's going to place this up at the top. Notice if I were to drag this down to 0, it's, you know, hovering halfway into the ground. So I just want to move that pivot point. It's not instrumental to do that, but I like to do it, and I'm going to show you how to do it right now. The first thing I want to do is go to my Hierarchy tab. This is the third tab in our command panel, Hierarchy. I go in here when I want to affect only the pivot point. So if you click on Affect Pivot Point, okay, and you have your Move tool enabled or Select and Move, when I move stuff, I'm only moving the pivot point. I can move it over here if I wanted to. I don't want to. I want to move it to the very bottom. But I like to do things in an exact way. So I'm not going to just willy-nilly drag this down to the bottom like that. I'm going to actually use a tool called the Align tool. Again, so I have to be in my Modify tab. Affect Pivot Only has to be enabled. Click the Align tool. Now when the Align tool is enabled and the Affect Pivot Only tool is enabled, I can click this. I'm basically aligning itself to itself. Of course, it's only affecting the pivot. And if you look on your screen, this is not the best thing that I did here, but notice there's the Y is going up and down and the X is going left and right. So I actually only want to affect the Y position. Actually, I'll probably affect this X position because I moved this. It's not exactly centered anymore. First, I'll affect the Y position. And the Y position, I want to say, you know what, pivot point is going to go to the minimum amount. I'm not sure why. And then I'm going to apply this. And there it goes. It drops from where it was to the minimum amount of this plane. I'm going to set that, okay? And I'm going to go again, do the same tool, the Align tool, click itself. This time I'm only going to align the X position, and I'm going to take the pivot point and align that to the center, apply that, yes, you see it just moved a tiniest little bit. And now I know that this pivot point is at the bottommost point, and it's in the exact center going left and right, and I'm going to say okay. I'm going to turn off Affect Pivot Point, and now when I move this object, it moves by the bottom, so where its feet are, right? So I'm going to now zoom out, and I'm going to show you these little numbers down here, X, Y, and Z. If I have my Move tool enabled with the little arrow, or hit W, I'm going to right-click these little spinners, right-click, and that right-clicking any spinner in 3D Studio Max just sets that to the lowest number it could possibly be. So sometimes it's 0. It's not including negatives as well. It sets it as close to 0 as possible. Okay. So there is step 1. Now we have to actually place an image on here. We're going to do that in the next video. Alright, so have a good day.